Just remember just a few quick housekeeping items before we do start. When it's your turn to speak, please remember to unmute yourselves. If you do forget, I will try to chime in. And please, I know it's a lot harder. We don't have the bell that you can all hear, but when time has expired, I'll be given the cue for that, and we will certainly try to get you to finish your remarks, but please adhere to the time requirements as well. All righty, let's go ahead and get started. Here we go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce and Rochester Listens Candidates Night and Forum. Tonight, we will hear from candidates seeking election to the New Hampshire State House of Representatives, as well as the New Hampshire State Senate. My name is TJ Jean of Frisbee Memorial Hospital, and I'll be serving as your moderator this evening. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, albeit virtually. But due to the current situation, this is the only way we can all get together, and we certainly appreciate the candidates taking time to meet with us this way. Tonight's event will allow our voters in the Greater Rochester community, as well as our businesses through the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce, to hear from those candidates seeking election to state office. And I'd like to thank all of the staff at the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce for all of their help in coordinating this Zoom meeting this evening. I also want to thank our media representatives who are going to be with us tonight. We have Mr. Harrison Thorpe of the Rochester Voice and Glenn Cebalewski from Foster's Daily Democrat. So before we get started any further, I'd like to introduce those candidates seeking office on November 3rd. Starting with Ward 1, District 7, we have incumbent representative Tim Fontenot and challenger Harrison Debris, who is unable to attend this evening. For Wards 1 and 6, this is District 22, we have incumbent representative Tom Kaczynski and Peg Higgins. For Ward 2, District 9, both of these candidates are unable to attend. But they are Tom Ransom, the Democratic nominee, and Republican challenger Clifford Newton. In Ward 3, District 10, we have Aidan Ankerberg. We did not hear from Mr. Ankerberg, so I don't believe he will be joining us this evening. And for Wards 2 and 3, District 23, we have incumbent Democrat State Representative Sandra Keynes and challenger Fenton Gruen. In Ward 4, District 11, we have incumbent Representative Chuck Grassi and Republican challenger Jonathan Clement. In Wards 4 and 5, District 24, we have Jerry Minahan and Representative challenger Susan DeLamus. For Ward 5, District 12, we have incumbent Representative Matt Kittredge, who we did not hear from this evening, so I don't believe he'll be joining us, and challenger Annie DeVito, the Democratic nominee. And for Ward 6, District 8, we have incumbent Representative Donna Ellis and Republican challenger Calman Barkin, who we did not hear from. So the format for this evening will be as in years past. We'll have a 2-minute opening remark for all of our candidates, followed by a questioning session from our media panelists. The questions from our media panelists will be addressed to all candidates, so everyone will have an opportunity to answer those questions, and we will keep going as time allows. When we wrap up the New Hampshire State Representative portion, we'll take a brief break and we'll transition over to the State Senate debate for District 6, and that will feature incumbent Senator James Gray and Democratic challenger Mr. Rice. So with that, I will start the opening of our remarks, and we'll start with Ward 1, District 7, incumbent representative Mr. Tim Fontenot.
Thank you very much. Good evening, and everyone, and thank you especially to the Rochester Chamber for all your work putting this forum on this evening, especially in this time of Zoom. My name is Tim Fontenot, and I'm running for re-election as the state representative for Stratford District 7, which covers Rochester's Ward 1. About me, I grew up in East Rochester. I graduated from Spalding High School, class of 1974. I am married, and I continue to live and work in Rochester as I have for most of my life. I've been a realtor here in Rochester for the past 27 years, which has given me the opportunity to meet and talk with a lot of local residents about their concerns and issues, certainly. I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I have experienced in Rochester, and I consider serving as a representative as a way for me to give back to my community. I've also served on the Rochester Planning Board for the past 20 years. I've been involved with the Rochester Opera House and the Rochester Chamber of Commerce and the Stratford County Board of Realtors on various committees over the years. Politically, I consider myself a moderate candidate who does not bring a specific agenda to this position, but rather tries to represent my district with a level-headed, common sense approach to governing. I'm always concerned about local property taxes that are especially hard on young families and retirees or fixed income residents. And I'm also very aware of the need for increased state funding of our public school system. I believe we have a great school system in Rochester, and I'd like to see that trend continue. I don't pretend to have all the answers. When a proposal is made or a bill is introduced, I listen to all of the arguments for and against, and then try to make my decision based on what I believe will be the best interest of my community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fontenot. Next, we will hear from Ward 1, District 22, incumbent representative, Mr. Tom Kaczynski.
Hi, I'd just like to correct that. I'm not the incumbent, I'm the challenger. My name's Tom Kaczynski Jr., and I'm 65 years old. I'm married with a college age. I've been a live dealer in a business my grandfather started in 1934, and have been active in Rochester politics since the 1990s. I previously represented District 22 from 2015 to 2018, and I'm a proud conservative, even low spending and taxes. And I'm running to serve the district and to get a Republican majority back in the House. The last session, thank God, the governor vetoed several liberal spending bills. 2020 has been a crazy year, and China virus has been unleashed on us. Now, businesses have closed in the state, jobs were lost, and the private sector is hurting to raise taxes or regulations. When I was on the ED&A committee, I fought new unnecessary regulations, such as new fire codes and building codes, which the Democrat majority passed last session, and inflicted huge costs increases to building. Before the pandemic, the US and New Hampshire had exceptional growth as a result of reduced regulations and lower taxes. And we could return to that situation with these successful policies. I believe in individual liberty, the New Hampshire and the US Constitution. I'm a pro-Second Amendment person, and I wouldn't vote to add any restrictions to the gun laws in the state of New Hampshire. I would ask the voters for their vote for me on November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaczynski. My apologies for calling you the incumbent on that one. Just following the script here, so my apologies.
You don't have to apologize to me.
Next, we will hear from Democratic challenger, Peg Higgins.
Thank you. I'd just like to restate that I'm the incumbent. Thank you. I first got to know Rochester when I was teaching here in Chamberlain Street School and at the Gonick School. My husband and I liked what we saw and decided to relocate here 15 years ago. 2 years ago, I decided to try to run to represent Rochester Wards 1 and 6 in Concord. I am asking for the opportunity to return to the legislature. A few of the things that we were able to achieve in the last legislature were the reduction of the cost of insulin, ending the death penalty, and returning funds to the local communities. Rochester received $9.5 million from the state. If this supported our schools and our municipal budget. If I'm fortunate enough to return to the legislature, I will work to continue to look out for us all. Our next legislature faces some important issues. If elected, I will support, among other things, a nonpartisan redistricting commission. We will be redrawing our district lines in 2021. Legislation providing for a fair redistricting drawing of lines passed both houses with bipartisan support during the last legislature, but the governor vetoed each one. I want to assure that everyone has a voice at the table, not just the majority party. If elected, I will also support a paid family medical leave. Everyone dealing with needing to care for themselves or a sick family member should not have to make a choice between staying home or going to work in order to pay the rent. Legislation protecting economic security passed both houses with bipartisan support during the last legislative session. This too was vetoed by the governor. I want to support the majority of the New Hampshire citizens who want to see this become the law of our state. If elected, I will also work to establish a livable wage for the workers in New Hampshire. We currently have the lowest hourly rate of the surrounding states. A livable wage legislation was passed by both houses of the legislature, again by bipartisan support, only to be vetoed by the governor. If I have the honor of returning to Concord, I will work to raise the minimum wage to a livable wage. I'd like to thank the Chamber for this opportunity to talk with the people of Rochester, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will move to Ward 2 and 3, District 23, and hear from incumbent Representative Sandra Keynes.
Thank you, and thanks to the Chamber for once again doing this. That's a lot more complicated this year, obviously, for everybody. I'm running for re-election because I have the time, I have the commitment, and I have the interest that some people don't, and I'm not sure that, let's start with this. I'm a Rochester native, one of 7 children. My dad came here in 1912 with a little satchel and $1 in his pocket, and managed to send 5 kids to college, which I didn't think was too bad. But one of the things we learned was, and we heard it multiple times, there was nothing like coming into New York Harbor and seeing the Statue of Liberty and knowing that you had an opportunity in front of you and that you had an obligation to give back. And that's how I spent my life, volunteering for various organizations in the city, some outside the city, but mostly in. Also serving on a lot of the boards. I've been fortunate enough as a bipartisan legislator over there to be appointed to various commissions by both Republican governors and Democratic governors. So I think that says something about the kind of style I spend with presenting myself over there. The minimum wage is obviously, it's an interesting story I have. Back when the minimum wage was 4 something an hour, Governor Sununu #1 was the governor, and he absolutely begged
Looks like we might be having some audio difficulties with Representative Keynes. All right, so we will move on. If her audio comes back, we certainly let her finish her thought on that. So next we will hear from Republican challenger Fenton Gruen.
Thank you. My name is Fenton Gruen. I'm a 40-year resident of Rochester and Barrington. I'm happily married to my college sweetheart for 50 years. We have 7 children and 23 grandchildren, none that I know of on the way. I am the co-owner and CEO of Gruen Construction. We've been operating in Rochester for a little bit over 20 years and specialize in energy efficient commercial and residential construction and have been just very successful in that. I have over 45 years of small business leadership, serve on the board of 2 nonprofits and was past chairman of one of those. Also was a conservative voice in the New Hampshire Senate in 2011 and 12, and I'd like to carry on with work I did there. On business and the economy, high taxes and overregulation strangle economic growth and squash job creation. I will oppose new taxes, including income or sales tax. I will push for sound business practices and zero-based budgeting to keep every department of the New Hampshire government lean and efficient and eliminate outdated or unnecessary programs. One of the things that private businesses have to do constantly is rethink and reorganize and eliminate unnecessary processes, steps, procedures that add cost. And I want to see that same thing done with state government on an ongoing basis. One of the first things that each newly elected representative or senator does, in fact, it is the very first thing, is we swear allegiance to the New Hampshire and the US Constitution. These words from the Declaration of Independence form the foundation for our Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I am a firm believer that our Constitution should be interpreted as it is written, and I am a firm supporter of due process and of our First and Second Amendment rights, freedom of religion, the right to free speech, and the right to keep and bear arms.
Thank you, Mr. Gruen. Your time has elapsed.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, next we will move to Ward 4, District 11, and we will hear from incumbent Representative Chuck Grassi.
Thank you, TJ. Thank you, TJ. My name is Chuck Grassi, and I've been the current state representative for the last 4 years from Ward 4. My family moved here back in 1870, so I don't know if I'm the longest for families here in Rochester, but certainly I've lived my entire life here in Rochester and raised my family, and 2 of my children live here in Rochester as well. One of the things that I think is important to do is not to make promises or tell people what you're going to do, but tell them what you've done for the last 4 years. The last 4 years that I've been in the legislature, I'm one of the few representatives who has a 100% voting record. I have not missed one vote. So my dedication to the voters of the district has been shown in that I'm there and I do my job. I've also been actively involved in a number of issues that are important to the citizens of the state of New Hampshire, and for many people here in Rochester as well. It was my bill that was passed that actually decriminalized marijuana and the possession of small amounts of marijuana here in the state of New Hampshire. It took a long number of years to get that passed, but it was something we finally did get passed in the last session. Also, this last session, a lot of things have been going on in the southeastern part of New Hampshire. There have been a number of studies that show we have a very high rate of pediatric cancer in this area, and also bladder cancer in this area as well. It was found that one of the possible problems is the incidences of arsenic in our water. It was my bill that basically reduced our limits of arsenic in our public drinking water. We now have the strongest regulations in the country for arsenic in our drinking water to try to eliminate those cancer cases that we have. Another thing that I've been working on, I've been a leader in the House as far as wetlands and water quality is concerned. My work on the Resources, Recreation, and Development Committee has been very important in the preservation of wetlands and for the protection of wildlife as well. Also, I've worked in public health issues, a number of health issues. It was my bills, House Bill 1280 and House Bill 1281, which limits and caps the price for EpiPens, and also the bill that I sponsored was the capping the price for insulin, which became House Bill 1280, which is one of the major prescription drug programs in the country this last year, which sets up a number of things, a wholesale prescription drug board, and also a importing of drugs from Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grassi. All right, next we will move to wards. Actually, do we have Mr. Clement with us?
No.
Okay,
No.
thank you. Make that note. All right, next we will move to wards 4 and 5, District 24, and we will start with Jerry Minahan, the Democratic nominee. I will, just in the effort of trying to keep it moving, I know a lot of you don't always see the time expiring in the chat, so I will let you know at 30 seconds, and I'll cut in when time has expired. Mr. Minahan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, TJ. And I'm Jerry Minahan, and I'm running for state representative for Stratford 24, which is Rochester wards 4 and 5. I'd like to start out by thanking the Chamber for holding this very valuable session. I'm a longtime resident. Peggy and I have raised our children here, and I've worked over the years in information technology, both in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Two big issues for me are education and the economy. COVID has had a serious impact on both. I'm a strong supporter of public education, and we need to make sure that Rochester is treated fairly as far as school funding is concerned. Schools need our help now more than ever. On the economy, the state must not only focus on large companies, which fortunately Rochester is attracting and keeping, but also on those smaller businesses which highlight our community spirit. State budgets, both now and in the future, must be careful and supportive. COVID has taken a lot, and our state reps need to help where they can. If elected, I consider myself a moderate, and I'd like to add my voice to other reasonable voices in Concord. I hope to continue to serve this city in a volunteer capacity, and I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minahan. Next, we will move to Ward 5, District 12, and we'll hear from Democratic challenger Sue Ann DeVito.
Thank you, TJ. Actually, it's Annie on the ballot. Just to
Perfect.
be clear, it's Annie DeVito. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the Chamber for hosting this event. I decided to run for state legislature in the middle of a pandemic because I believe that my career in business and data analytics and my personal experiences raising children in the community, working with the needy, and advocating for the environment make me uniquely qualified to represent the people of Rochester in the State House. I'm concerned that some in the legislature have placed loyalty to party above doing the people's business, and in many cases seem to prefer obstructionism to cooperation. The issues facing our state and our communities are not simple and cannot be addressed by just saying no. Like the ecosystems which I studied at college, our society is made up of a web of interconnecting parts. Every proposal that comes before the legislature can have both positive and negative impacts on individuals and institutions within our society. For example, care for the elderly is affected by the needs of small and large businesses such as healthcare providers and care facilities, the needs of employees for training, adequate pay, time off, and benefits, the needs and resources of the elderly themselves and their families. This was already a difficult and precarious situation, as I experienced for myself in caring for and making decisions for my mother, who died under hospice care in an assisted living facility here in Rochester in January at the age of 94. The COVID-19 pandemic has made this heartbreakingly more complicated for all involved. About 80% of the COVID-19 deaths in New Hampshire have occurred in long-term care facilities. And while the governor's administration talks about the problem, the governor vetoed HB 1246, which would have helped fund training for nursing assistants. The opioid crisis, crime, homelessness, climate change, uneven tax burdens, and providing quality education for our children are all complicated, interconnected issues that require critical thinking and cooperation. As your state representative, I will work with other like-minded legislators on the problems facing our state to find and support solutions that are equitable and that benefit as many people as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Appreciate that. Next, we will move to Ward 6, District 8, and we'll hear from incumbent representative Donna Ellis.
I'm Donna Alice, and I've lived in Rochester since 1986. I am married, have a stepson, and I had a daughter who passed away from cancer. And I worked in quality control in the medical assembly facilities and until my retirement. And I've seen a lot of companies come and go, and a lot of them go overseas, and then you're without a job, and how do you pay your bills? So I like to try to keep jobs here in New Hampshire. And I also like to mention that when we become state reps, we take an oath to uphold the Constitution. So I will not be for anything that will take away your guns. I know that's a big issue for some people. And I'm running because of my daughter's illness from cancer, and I wanted to uphold legislation that would keep our families healthy. I'm in the Environment and Agriculture Committee, and we do legislation to protect the innocent people and animals and to keep the food chains and the restaurants healthy. And a lot of companies from out of state come in with lobbyists who try to do things that are not in the best interest of people in New Hampshire. And I like to uphold the legislation to protect the citizens of New Hampshire. And also, of course, I'm a property owner. Of course, I like to keep the taxes low like everybody else. And my main thing is to keep, try to keep people healthy, keep pesticides away from the children's playgrounds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna. All right, well, that does it for opening statements. We do have, I believe, Representative Keynes now has rejoined us on the telephone. And Representative Keynes, if you can hear me, you still have 30 seconds left in your opening statement. And I believe you were telling us a story about the minimum wage and Governor John Sununu. Can you hear us, Sandy? Okay, well, we will try to get her back on the line, and we'll definitely let her have her 30 seconds. All right, now we will move to the media panel questions. Again, with us, we have Glenn Cebalewski from Foster's, and I believe Mr. Harrison Thorpe has joined us via telephone. Each of our media representatives will be asking questions to all the candidates. I will keep track of who the questions are directed to, and we'll change the order up a little bit so nobody has to wait a very long time to get through. But we'll start with Mr. Cebalewski, and you can have your first question to Mr. Tim Fontenot of District 7.
Thanks a lot, TJ. I'd start out with the biggest issue of the last year, of course, which is the coronavirus pandemic. And I'd like to know from the candidates how they feel the state has done so far with the response to the pandemic, and what more should the state be doing to help individuals, businesses, and schools as we continue to work through it.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, obviously 2020 and the pandemic has been a year unlike anything that most any of us have ever experienced in our lifetime. And because of that, because of all the things that came along that were just simply unknowns, it has really been a learning process, I believe, for everybody in every department. You know, I think that New Hampshire, based on just looking at statistics, comparing us with the rest of the country, I think that we've done very well. Could we have done better in certain areas? I'm sure that there could be, that there are areas that we could have made different moves and helped people differently. But all in all, I give New Hampshire a really good rating for what we've done so far, and I feel fortunate to live in New Hampshire during this time. You know, I do know that small businesses are struggling, and I think that's where the focus needs to be to help people get going again. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Fontenot. Next, we will hear response to that same question from Mr. Tom Kaczynski. You're muted, Tom. I don't know if you can click the button. There you go.
Was that, sorry. Okay. Basically, I think we had pretty successful response in the state. The deaths were quite low compared to the rest of the country. But in my opinion, I got some disagreement with the governor. I think there was too many restrictions placed on different businesses and people in the private sector. I think over time, a lot of these lockdowns throughout the country are going to be proven to be a mistake. I think if you had a business that was deemed to be not important or not essential, how would you feel? You're trying to put food on the table and you're being told to shut down. I mean, I think there's some that could be constitutionally challenged there, And I think we're all adults. We can make decisions. Enough information came out. If you're an older person and you don't want to take the risk, then you don't go to a restaurant or bar and so on. But in general, with a 98% survival rate of this COVID-19, I think in general, especially for young people, it's not all that as bad as it's been
Thank
portrayed.
you.
Thank
All right.
you.
Yep, thank you. Next, we will hear from Peg Higgins.
Thank you. I think in general, we have done very well here in New Hampshire with the COVID response. I'd like to take a moment to talk about the county complex, where they have worked diligently and hard, and we have no cases there. There have been a few people who've come into the jail who have tested positive. They've been isolated until they were symptom-free and testing negative. The nursing home has been very well administered, and there is no COVID there. I think that as much as we all want to get back to normal, we really need to buckle down and keep our distance, wear our masks, wash our hands, stay socially distanced, stay home if you're sick. That's the way we're going to get back to normal. We may be tired of the pandemic, but it's not tired of us yet. It's not done. And I think we need to continue on with what we've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Sandra Keynes, if she's able to be on. Can you hear us, Sandy? Okay, then we'll move to Mr. Fenton Gruen.
I think that overall our state has handled it well, but I also think that it is time to carefully look at the risk, the statistical risks of this disease. After 7 months, we have less than 7/10 of our population. 0.7% of our population have tested positive, and that's with a significant amount of increased testing. That's 0.1% of our population per month. And there comes a time where we have to balance the economic potential for damage, the emotional damage, mental health damage, and I think it's time to be opening up our state more than we are. I would compare, for comparison purposes, I would look at South Dakota, I would look at Iowa, look at Sweden, which have kept an open policy, and their rates, their infection rates and their deaths have not indicated that they took a wrong decision on that. The World Health Organization just recently said that they believe that lockdowns were a wrong approach to this. I think that for most of people, yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, next we will hear from District 11 and Representative Chuck Grassi.
Thank you, TJ. One of the things I think we could have done a lot better There was a lot of schools and communities have struggled as far as getting protective devices, face masks, other devices into their communities. And I think I have to agree with some of the people. I have to agree with Tom. I mean, we could be open, but we need a comprehensive plan from the state, and we should be open in a lot of places. There also should be a mask mandate, and there should be more testing involved. I have to differ when somebody says Sweden was success. Take a look at the data. A lot of people died in Sweden, and they still haven't achieved the herd immunity that they wanted to get to. But if we want to open, we need to follow the plans that the scientists have presented to us. Face mask, testing. With those two things, face mask and testing, we can reopen our economy, and we should have done it a long time ago. The governor wouldn't take that position.
Thank you, Mr. Grassi. Next, we'll hear from Jerry Minahan.
Thanks, TJ. I think overall, I think the state's done a really good job with COVID. As much as you can say anybody's doing a good job with it. I do like the idea that, we've listened to the scientists, we followed the data. We also have, and I think we'll need to keep having a flexible approach to all of this. Obviously, we've had a lot of businesses that have been really hammered by this and schools. We need to keep prioritizing funding as much as that's made available. And I think the other thing is with winter coming and potentially rising numbers again, we can't just sit on the sidelines. We have to be actively involved.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Annie DeVito.
Thank you. Yes, as I said, I think that I mentioned long-term care facilities, and that I believe that they need more help. I agree with what Chuck was saying. We could have done better if we had more leadership on getting people to wear masks, getting people out there. Saying that people should stay home if they're elderly, or if they have conditions, takes a lot of people out of the economy. So if you want the economy to come back, people need to be able to feel comfortable getting out and doing things. And also, saying that only so many people died is really kind of discounting the lives of the elderly, and also of children and young people who have very long-term lasting effects. We don't even really know what all the impacts of this disease are on people. So it's a fairly cavalier, I think, to just say that people should go out and get the disease. That's a very serious thing.
Thank you, Ms. DeVito. Next, we'll move to Donna Ellis.
Okay. I think that the herd immunity is when most of the people are vaccinated and there are only a few people that aren't, that will be immune to it. That's my understanding from the physician of the Stratford County Nursing Home. And I think we should all be patient, wear a mask, wash our hands. The businesses of New Hampshire have taken over because some of the leadership didn't really direct them, and they've posted signs to say wear a mask if you come in our store, and they've got outdoor dining, and I went there this summer and had dined outdoors, and it was really nice. And I think that they're using their creative imagination to handle this epidemic. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have been told that Representative Keynes has now joined us on the telephone. Sandy, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I sure can, loud and clear.
Okay, finally. That was what I couldn't get through.
Well, there.
Okay, I'll answer this question.
Yes, please.
Northern New England is sort of an isolated area. We don't have a lot of comings and goings. We're not a Boston, we're not a New York, and frankly, we're not any of those big cities where they have a lot of movement around. And so I think in that way, our geography has been very good for us. But I had a test back several months ago now, and it took 14 days to get the results. Well, in those 14 days, a lot of things and a lot of places could have been visited by me. And I didn't happen to do that, but I understand why people get frustrated with the system. We've got to have a system of testing where you can get results back in a reasonable time, 24, 48 hours, so that you can actually do some tracing and find out where this virus is moving. But other than that, I think, we've done a relatively good job with it, and I am very pleased with Stratford County. They're one of the few nursing homes in the whole state and jails that have not had cases. So.
Thank you so much, Sandy. We appreciate that. And while you do have 30 seconds left in your opening statements, if you'd like to go ahead and finish the story about the minimum wage and Governor John Sununu, you were starting to talk about that.
Yeah, John number one, I served in the House with him, and he was the governor, and excellent governor, by the way. And because I was a Republican in those days too. But he insisted that the legislature pass an increase in the minimum wage because he said, we need young workers in this state. And if we don't have workers, the economy can do nothing. And it proved to be very advantageous. Things did turn around then, and it was pretty good. And I 25 nowadays, and have the governor veto anything beyond that. The current governor, it just makes no sense to me when everybody around us is 9 or 950 around us, 3 states. So
Excellent.
Why not travel
Thank you.
20 miles or something for, an extra $80 a week? But anyway.
Well, they're good. Thank you, Sandy. We want to make sure that you finished that story because you did still have time.
Oh, good. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Next, we will move to our next question. And Harrison Thorpe, have you joined us?
I believe so. Can you hear me?
Perfect. I can hear you loud and clear, sir. If you want to go ahead,
All right.
ask your question, and all of our candidates who are with us will have an opportunity to answer. We'll start with this question going to Chuck Grassi.
Okay, Mr. Grassi, this kind of is more COVID related as well. Of course, we've lost an awful lot of revenue in the state with the hospitality industry and meals taxes, lodging taxes. And do you think during this time of reduced revenues during the pandemic, it's really time to trim some of those expenditures across the board in the state government, say, I don't know, by 10 or 15 or 20%? I'm sure we took that hit on the revenue side.
I think what we need to take a look at is we need to take a look at what they're doing at the federal government level. The communities and states and need some assistance. We can't do this. When you take a look at some of the budgets, I happen to deal with environmental services. And one of the things is they are understaffed and overworked. And we have tried to increase their budgets through increasing of fees, but you'd only go so far with that. If we would have cut 20% from the Department of Environmental Services, they wouldn't be able to get out there and do septic system inspection. They wouldn't get out there to be able to do anything pretty much, except for push paperwork across their desk. It's something that our budget is about as lean as it can be right now. And one of the problems that happens with that, and one of the big problems is that when we become so lean, it reverts back to the local property taxpayers. And I would hate to see the property taxpayers have to pick up things when the state reneges on its responsibilities. And that's something we've been trying to solve the last 2 years. With the additional funding to the city of Rochester in particular, we were able to restore some of the monies that had been taken away from us from cuts before. We lose that money, it's going to end up right on the taxpayers' back.
Thank you. All right, next we'll hear from Jerry Minahan.
Sorry about that. Hope everybody can hear me. Yeah, I think with the COVID crisis, and it's going to be a continuing crisis, I think that in terms of the state budget, in terms of all budgets, I think we really, I'm not saying necessarily trim, but I think you really need to look at everything. It needs to be very comprehensive. And I think as Chuck was just saying, you know, a lot of the local communities, they're going to need help. They're going to continue to need help in all areas, economically, educationally, and so on. So I do think that everything is going to have to be looked at.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Annie DeVito.
I don't have a lot to add to this. I think that Chuck and Jerry have both really said some really good stuff. I don't think that there's big places in the state budget that I would try to cut. I think that we are pretty efficient on in most of the areas. I would look at things that people might suggest, but I think we're pretty tight there. I would look to the federal government to help out communities, and take it from there.
Thank you. Donna Ellis, you're next.
I think we should be getting the money and more transparency on the money from the CARES Act that was given to Sununu from the government. He's distributed some of it, but I think it could be handled better and to help small towns. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Tim Fontenot.
Thank you very much. I believe strongly that the budgets of the next at least couple of sessions are going to be challenging at best. And, certainly cuts are going to have to be made. I don't believe that we should be looking at any 15 or 20% across the board, because different segments have been hurt differently. Different areas and different segments of the economy have been hurt differently. So I think that you need to look at that when assessing where we try to raise additional revenue and where we need to make cuts to make the budget work. It's going to be a challenge at best. And I would also agree with Representative Ellis. If I had any criticism of the governor's handling of this pandemic, I would say it was the distribution of funds from the CARES Act. The federal government sent $1.25 billion to the state of New Hampshire, and because of the emergency order, the governor was able to control that entirely by himself and really push the legislature out of the process, which I don't think is the New Hampshire way.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Tom Kaczynski.
Yeah, definitely spending has to be cut in proportion here. This is pretty interesting how this worked. Government employees have suffered very few disruptions in this crisis here. In fact, in the city of Rochester, many employees were paid for days when they didn't work. And as far as I know, nobody got laid off. The state, I haven't heard of mass layoffs there. Yet in the private sector, businesses and people with private jobs had to stay home and rely on some unemployment check, and I'm sure these people had no fat extra money just hanging around, falling out of their pockets. So I think the government has to adjust accordingly to this and get it in proportion. So maybe the public sector has to sacrifice somewhat. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Peg Higgins.
I don't have very much to add to what's been said. I agree that the federal government's going to have to help out lots of us, not just New Hampshire, but the rest of the country. It's going to be a real challenge. I think we're going to have to do some really deep thinking and communicating with our fellow legislatures about what to do with the budget and how to meet the needs of the public without passing down the responsibilities to the property taxpayer. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Representative Sandra Keynes. Sandy, can you hear us? Okay, we'll move to Mr. Fenton Gruen.
Thank you. I think that in this, in the situation we're in, I don't believe that we can make dramatic cuts to our state budget. I think we have to do everything we can to reduce spending, but given the current situation, I don't think we'll be able to do a 10 or 15% suggested. However, I think the very best thing we can do is get business going again. And that increases tax revenues. It reduces the costs that are associated with businesses being shut down. And I think we have to be careful not to think that the federal government can bail us out of everything. As it stands, we will have a $3 to $4 trillion deficit for this fiscal year. Next year will likely be way up there as well. And if we continue to spend and act as if the federal government can just borrow money and borrow money and borrow money to bail us out of a crisis, we could end up with economic problems that will do great, great harm as well.
Thank you. Representative Keynes, have you joined us? All right. If she does, we'll try to get her back on. Next, we'll have another round of questions, and I'll turn it over to Glenn to ask his next questions of all candidates. And we'll start with Miss Donna Ellis answering the first question and going from there.
So this is obviously a difficult year to get out and do any door-to-door campaigning, but I'm sure you're all communicating with voters through social media, emails, phone banks, things like that. What are some of the top concerns you're hearing from residents as you talk to voters?
I think that some of the top ones are the COVID crisis, the unemployment, and taxes. I've heard a lot, are you going to raise our taxes? No, we're not going to raise your taxes. And I'd be against a state tax because people come here because we are a tax-free state. So why put taxes, state tax on us? But I guess that's it.
All right, thank you. Mr. Fontenot.
Thank you. I guess I hear some of the similar concerns. One of the things that has happened since the pandemic started is that we no longer hear very much about the opioid crisis, which was at the very forefront last year and for a few years before. So I think that the substance abuse crisis and mental health crisis is going on behind the scenes right now. And I think that, we're going to realize that that a lot of work needs to be done in that direction. I also hear people's concerns about property taxes and about how they are been affected from the pandemic. Again, I think that this is a crisis that has affected different segments of the society quite differently. Certain businesses have not been affected at all or have increased their revenues during this time, while others have been shut down completely. The restaurants and entertainment venues have been really hurt hard. So I think people are looking in those directions. How are we going to help those particular businesses that were affected the worst?
Thank you, Mr. Fontenot. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Kaczynski.
Recently I was in a restaurant and talking with some people about got to talking about the lockdowns, and that really did upset them. I was surprised how many people were really upset with losing their freedoms. And I think another big issue here, one of the biggest, is the tax situation. And, people may deny this, but the Democrats voted for a Family Leave Act that would have been an income tax on the citizens. And people do not want that here. It's kind of funny too, because it runs across Democrat and Republican lines. Just like when the tax cap got passed in 2008 in Rochester, which I was involved in, 71% of the people voted for that in the year that Obama got 70% of the vote. So people of both parties don't want increased taxes, and especially an income tax in New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. Kaczynski. Ms. Higgins.
What I hear when talking with my constituents, my neighbors, is a big concern about education. The fact that we've had to disrupt our education system and go virtual, many, precautions of small classes and virtual education. We're going to have a lot of makeup to do once this pandemic is over. The other thing I've heard a lot about is healthcare. Again, to reiterate what Tim said, the opioid crisis, I'm afraid, has kind of gotten pushed to the background during this pandemic, and I'm sure it's still out there. I know it's still out there. Our death rates are going up here in the state. The other one is the economic recovery. In order to make a safe recovery, we need to first control this virus, and so that we can open up. I think our businesses downtown have done an amazing job of being creative and coming up with ideas such as the seating for the restaurants has been a lot of fun this summer. So I think those are the big issues: quality education, healthcare, and then recovery of the economy.
Thank you. Representative Keynes, are you with us now? Sandy, are you there? Okay, I'll move to Mr. Gruen.
Hello? Hello?
Oh, go ahead, Sandy. We hear you.
Okay. My problem has been that the CARES Act has not been spread around what I thought was more evenly and fairly. I think in the state of New Hampshire, and you know this better than I probably, I think we've lost 14 community hospitals in the past year and a half. And that's a scary thought if you've got to drive 40 miles when you're in pain to a hospital or something to that effect. But the other thing is, the money coming to those poor little guys down on Main Street that I really feel bad for is a little more complicated. The forms that had to be filled out were quite complicated. And if you didn't have an on-staff accountant or an on-staff attorney, it was almost impossible to fill those out. And some of the small people I've talked with didn't get them formed. You know, some of the family businesses didn't get them filled out in time. Whereas the big corporations or ones having 25 or 30 employees always have that kind of availability of staff on hand that can go over and spend the whole day going over the form to get the money. And so that's the biggest problem I have with this money coming in. I'm sure that the folks that got it, it was very important to them. But I think there are a lot of smaller outfits that didn't get it that should have.
Thank you. Mr. Gruen.
I have been hearing about small business struggles from the COVID-19 crisis, but I've also heard frustration from people who have been affected by the opioid crisis and who have had the sense that the COVID-19 crisis has just eclipsed what a year ago was the news, and that we need to be looking at a full picture of this. I've heard people very concerned about what will happen with both our state and our national economy if we continue on the path that we're on.
Thank you. Mr. Grassi.
Thank you, TJ. What I've been hearing most about, I think, and a lot of other people have heard from as well about, is healthcare. One of the things is when you get laid off from your job, a lot of times you just lose your healthcare that same day. And this is a lot of people are out there right now that don't have coverage. And it's been very, very difficult for them. And this is something that people are really concerned about. It's part of the unemployment situation. Another thing is housing. We need to have affordable housing and the homeless. And we have a homeless population here in Rochester, which needs to be considered, and something needs to be done. And I've had a number of people talk about that as well here in the district, that we need to provide some sort of way to deal with the homeless situation here in the city of Rochester. And lastly, childcare. That's something else, is getting safe, affordable childcare has been really difficult for a lot of people. And it's something that needs to be considered. And this is one thing the governor could have done with the CARES Act money as well. There was money there for childcare. They took a ton of that money and used it for administration.
Thank you. Ms. DeVito.
I think it's been pretty well covered here, I guess, but certainly I've been hearing about COVID and property taxes and the opioid crisis. Homelessness, food insecurity is a thing that hasn't been talked about too much, but they kind of really go hand in hand, and we see a lot of issues of people with with substance abuse issues who are also homeless, who are food insecure. There's different programs that are going on, and I think one of the things that sort of cropped up was a program that I heard about run by one individual who has been working with restaurants, and people can order meals through particular restaurants that then get delivered to people who are food insecure. So I think it's really hopeful to see that kind of thing going on, but it is certainly something that's probably grown beyond those level of efforts, and that the state needs to be paying attention to, and certainly in the ways that all of these things kind of work together to cause issues in our communities is really important.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll have another question from Harrison Thorpe, and we'll start with Mr. Fontenot.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
All right. So police in New Hampshire and across the country now are facing retraining on things like implicit bias and making sure that police are fully cognizant of what groups like Black Lives Matter call systemic racism. So do you agree there needs to be retraining of police? And if you do, would you support the same type of training in our schools? And if so, at what grade would you begin these programs?
Thank you for your question. I guess I'll start out by debunking one of the things that I hear out there all the time, that all the Democrats want to defund the police departments. That's one of the Democrat agendas, is that we want to get rid of all the police departments and let the criminals run free on the streets. And that's certainly not this Democrat. I'll say that. I support the police departments. I support their works. I fully support retraining, and there was a governor's commission just recently on to look at this situation in the state of New Hampshire. They had a diverse group that went through all the different policies and have come up with a number of things that they think should be done, and they have and are beginning to implement those policies already. And I think that was a great way to approach it, to be proactive. Again, geographically and population-wise, up here in the corner of the nation, we're a little bit isolated from a lot of those type of incidents. But I certainly support retraining to be proactive in this situation. I'm not really sure how the question applies to that training in schools, but I would defer to the experts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kaczynski.
Yes, I don't really believe we have a problem in New Hampshire with police and racism. And in fact, it's not, if you look at the figures throughout the country, it's not really a problem. There really are very few blacks or minorities that actually get shot by a policeman. But when you bring up a BLM organization, I urge people to check into this. 2 of the 3 founders of the BLM are Marxists. And the third one is an LGBTQ activist. And as far as the Democrats in law and order, it's the Democrat cities and states where you have rioting run wild. And the only ones where they were ended, they actually took the president's advice, brought in the National Guard, and within short time, order was brought back. And it's very troubling to me, the people in the Democrat Party. You don't hear numbers of them refuting these ideas of defunding the police.
Thank you. Ms. Higgins.
My experience with the police here in Rochester have been very positive. I'm very impressed with our officers. I think they work hard and to get to know us and protect us and know what's going on in the community. And I do appreciate that, and I'd like to thank them. I think that police officers around the country have been taking on or have been given responsibilities that they are not been trained for, such as how to deal with a child with autism who might run and not be able to control their behaviors. I think that they have there's been a lot of time spent on criticizing the police, but I do think that we do need them. Talk about defunding doesn't mean we're going to take the funds away from them. It means that we're going to reorder how the money is spent so that the police don't have to control things that are, or deal with things that are beyond their control. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Keynes.
Yes. You know, I think the very first order of the day is to make sure you do the right kind of hiring. Make sure you have conversations with your possible recruits and understand where they're coming from, understand what they know. I think our chief this last couple of years has done an excellent job because we have very good young men coming into the city. What I do see is de-escalation has never been a top priority. And I do think that that is absolutely what's necessary. And I understand in tense situations, it's easy to get riled. Ask me, I'm one of those people. But you know, I think that those kinds of trainings can be very, very helpful. And I agree with Peg Higgins on the kinds of other services you need. I know that we had a crisis intervention team here in Rochester. I haven't heard much about them lately, but that was an attempt several years ago to bring down any kind of tragedy that might result from having a hot situation going on and people losing their temper and whatever.
Thank you.
I think in Rochester we're in pretty good shape, but don't watch the national news.
All right, thank you. Mr. Gruen.
I agree that we have a good police force in Rochester. In my discussions with police officers, I cannot remember talking to a police officer that did not appreciate thorough, effective training and welcome more training. So I think that's good. I think as time goes on, as things change and evolve, that the training for policemen needs to change. But overall, I support our law enforcement community, the vast majority of whom are principled public servants. When there are unlawful acts that are committed by police officers, by a small minority of police officers, they have to be addressed. They should be addressed decisively and severely, but lawfully. But I oppose and I just have no tolerance for looting and rioting under the guise of protest.
Thank you, Mr. Gruen. Mr. Grassi.
Thank you, TJ. This is something that I've spoken with a number of police officers over the years, and throughout my time on the Rochester City Council, I was always very supportive of the police department and particularly increasing staffing. I think the community the size of Rochester, we need a larger staff. One of the things that the problems that we have with staffing right now is it creates a stress level on the police department. This is something with police departments all over the place. When we're talking about defunding the police, we're not talking about defunding the police. In fact, in many cases, we may be talking about increasing the funding for the police. One of the things that we need to do, though, I think, is we need to make sure the police officers take their vacation time. That's one of the ways you can de-stress. Another thing is they work a tremendous amount of overtime. And if we increase staffing, we could reduce the overtime on it because that increases stress as well. Anybody in their jobs, if you're not taking your vacations and you're working 60 hours a week, every week, it's very stressful. Even if you're just serving coffee, it's not something that they should be doing. And that would solve a lot of our problems, I think, because I think they'd be able to deal with the citizens better if they were under less stressful situations. And one of the things is being rested, having a fresh mind going into a situation.
Thank you. Mr. Minahan.
Yes, you know, as others have said, I strongly support the police. Certainly in Rochester, we have a great force. I think they've done a great job. They continue to do a great job. One of the things I think that's been very effective is that they work so closely, I think, with the community, both in terms of, you know, we have those run meetings by ward. Those are very valuable, and also the policing in the schools. The resource officer. My grandson goes to the middle school, and you know, Officer DeLuca he's always out there and very helpful. I know that other towns and cities and states have problems. Fortunately, we don't have them, but I think continually looking at things, retraining when necessary, is always a good thing.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Ms. DeVito.
Yeah, so I agree with all that's been said about the excellence of our Rochester Police Department. I've done a lot of work with the Rochester Fellowship Kitchen, and I know that they've had opportunities to or need to call the police to come in, and I've heard them working with people, and I've been very impressed. That said, I'm a white person. I have talked to Black people not in Rochester, but in other communities in New Hampshire who feel like they have not been treated appropriately. So I definitely support this kind of training, and I would hope that, as I think Mr. Gruen said, that police would appreciate the investment in their career. In fact, the required education and training for police is actually sort of a less, I think, a lower number of hours than a lot of other similar professions. So I think that is a good thing all around. As far as the question about supporting it in schools, that particular kind of training that we're talking about, and I've taken implicit bias training for my work, I don't even think it would be really appropriate for students, but I would support it for teachers if they're not already getting it, and they may well be, because I think that it's important for teachers to understand these issues so that they can teach appropriately and treat their students appropriately. And I think that would be a good place for that.
Thank you. Miss Ellis.
I think the Rochester police are caring and compassionate. I think our state troopers are diverse as much as they can be on the East Coast. And I came from the Midwest where it was a lot more diversity. And when I was in grade school, I didn't know there was a problem till adults started talking about the Black people because they were my friends and I played with them. So I think a lot of this training should start at home. And I don't think we should they need to have a mental illness training because there are a lot of people, and I know that the Rochester police have found people wandering in the streets in the wintertime with their shirt off, hollering because they were on drugs and things, and they know how to handle that. And I think that a lot of the riots and the things that are happening are being encouraged by a Republican in the State House or the Washington, D.C. And he supports white supremacy and groups like that think it's all right to go ahead and riot and burn things down. It's because the Black people generally are not like that.
Thank you. All right, we're going to do one last question of our state representative candidates, and we're going to start with District 12 and Annie DeVito for this question, and it will come from Glenn Cebalewski.
Thank you. I want to ask a question to try to get at the heart of your bipartisan spirit. In order to be an effective legislator, you have to be willing to cross the aisle and work with the other party. Could you, if you're an incumbent legislator, talk about a time when you've done that, worked with lawmakers from the other side of the aisle to get something done? Or if you haven't yet served in the legislature, talk about how your approach would be.
Thank you. Yeah, I have not yet served in the legislature, but I think that my approach is about looking at problems and looking at potential solutions. And I'll talk to anybody who will sit down and talk about a problem and come up with potential solutions. I like to dig deep into things. I like to think about what all the different alternatives are and what the implications are of those things. I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, and I'm not coming up with anything really quickly. But yeah, here I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, when we were talking about opening up the schools in Rochester, I was approached by a friend who wanted me to start a petition for a mask mandate, and that would, I think, be sort of a maybe even considered a democratic thing to do to try to push through. And I looked at it and said, I don't think that it's the right thing for our community right now. We were talking, there was a lot of issues going on, and I was willing to push back and say, no, I don't necessarily think that's the thing. So just looking at all the issues and from different sides. Thank you.
Miss Ellis.
My first year in the legislature, we were seated Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat. And I discussed a lot of the bills with my neighbor who was a Republican and saw his point of view. And I think that's a good thing because it made me understand where they were coming from. And I don't always vote straight Democrat. I vote what we're supposed to be doing, nonpartisan, and what we know and feel is right thing to do. And in my committee, I talk. We don't just have little groups of Republican and Democrat. At break time, I talk to the Republicans and get their point of view on a lot of things, and it clears up a lot of questions in my mind. So I think I could work with across the aisle.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Fontenot.
Thank you. For me, when I first got into the legislature, I kind of brought my business experience, and being in sales, my business is negotiation and and problem solving, and that's what I do. So my first term, actually, commuting to Concord, one of the local Republican candidates used to ride with us.
I'm sorry, I missed.
Chuck and I and Matt Scruton rode together quite often and would discuss things all the way back and forth. So it was a good experience. And the other thing I think that you'll find when you get to the committees where the work is really done is that most of it is bipartisan. They say 80 or 85% of our work over there is bipartisan. And I have found myself many times in committee sitting beside the Republican representative and agreeing wholeheartedly with their point. So I really think what we see nationally is not what we typically see in the New Hampshire legislature, and I would like it to continue that way. Thanks.
Mr. Kaczynski.
Yes, my committee, the ED&A, was, I'd say, fairly nonpartisan and worked out pretty good. One thing I voted for, which I guess went along with most Democrats, was marijuana decriminalization. I couldn't see people being in jail for pot offenses. And another thing was in the 2017 budget, somebody that would think of me as a Republican partisan, I actually voted with the Democrat majority against the governor's budget. I was a member of one of 32 Republicans in the Freedom Caucus, and the reason we voted that way was because the budget had too high of an increase. And after much negotiation, the new budget went through and it was substantially less. But again, that was an example of going across party lines. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Higgins.
This is my first experience in the legislature, and during House session days, we are separated by Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other. I found that very upsetting, very difficult to form relationships and communicate with people who think differently than I do, which I think is a very valuable thing. In committee, it was amazing. We sat Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. And I got to know the people sitting on both sides of me. And we had some very good conversations about a bill. Frequently, my committee, which was election law, we came through unanimous on many, many bills because of our congeniality. I did help sponsor a bill this year that would try to get some of the dark money out of politics, out of campaigning. Unfortunately, due to COVID, it kind of got slidden away. I'd like to go back and continue with that, and I'm sure I can get people from the other side to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Representative Keynes.
Thank you. I've served on 2 committees where you had to do a lot of cross the aisle politicking, so to speak. One was finance, and it's never easy, as you might imagine, to put a state budget together. But, you know, with enough work and enough committees and enough sitting down with each other and give and take, you can actually do that. The other one that was quite helpful was the Transportation Public Works Committee, which is basically does all the transportation budgets for the state of New Hampshire. And you know, everybody wants a road or a bridge in their territory, but when you sit down and you look at the ins and outs of them and you say, okay, how about next year for you and this year for Charlie, and we'll put these monies together and we'll do the research and we'll do the science, the engineering and what have you. You can do that. It works very well in committees. So the committees, Jim is absolutely right. The work gets done in the committees, and that's where the bipartisanship and the collegiality really takes place. Gets a little tough once you get out on the floor, but in the committees, it's really quite remarkable how well folks get together and work together.
Thank you. Mr. Gruen.
I agree with Representative Fontenot that 85% or more of the legislation has a bipartisan component and bipartisan support. I haven't served in the House, but I served in the Senate for 2 years. I served on the Judiciary Committee, ED&A, and Joint Legislative Rules Committee. And most of what we did was bipartisan. I like people. I don't attack people. I address issues. And I thoroughly enjoy discussing issues with people that have a differing view than I do, because that's how I learn. And so my record is that I worked well with people. I became pretty close friends with nearly all of my Democrat colleagues and in the Senate, and would do that again if elected to the House.
Thank you. Mr. Grassi.
Thank you, TJ. I served in the House back 40 years ago as well, and one of the things I noticed a big difference was that back then everything was pretty much nonpartisan or bipartisan. There was very little separation between us when we all voted on the issues. I did have an instance this last session or session before where one of my wetlands bills was in committee. It was passed near unanimous. I think there was maybe 1 or 2 votes, and in committee everything is near unanimous or unanimous, and that's the strange thing, because when the bill got to the floor, I only had 1 Republican that voted for the bill on my committee. We sat separately, and I think that's a detriment to the House. We should be mingled together, and I think it would be easier for people to feel comfortable voting for the other side on issues. But because we feel set separately, I think that leadership tends to control their voters, and that's unfortunate, and that's not good.
Thank you. Mr. Minahan.
Yeah, well, again, I haven't served before, but I would say that it's pretty hard. At least you look at things nationally at these days, everybody has their own corner. There's a lot of tribalism. I don't see that, as people have been saying that are in the legislature and see the committee work. I think that's great. That's the thing that should continue. For me, I think with my background on project management, that's what you have to do. I mean, you have to talk to people, you have to get their ideas, what's important to them, and hopefully meld everything into a plan that people can agree with going forward. So I certainly consider myself somebody ready, willing, and able to work with anybody that can get the job done or the bill passed. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And at this time, this will conclude the state representative portion of tonight's candidates forum. I'd like to thank each and every one of our candidates who joined us this evening. And we hope that the voters at home will find their insight and their answers to some of our very tough questions very helpful as they go to the polls on Tuesday, November 3rd. We will rebroadcast this portion of the forum on Facebook as well as the Chamber website, and I believe on local community television through Atlantic Broadband. So I hope that voters will tune in. And once again, I'd like to thank all of our state representative candidates for joining us this evening. We're going to go ahead and take a brief break here as we transition to the New Hampshire State Senate District 6 Candidates Forum, where we will hear from incumbent state senator James Gray and Democrat challenger Christopher Rice. So on behalf of the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce and Rochester Listens, thank you for joining us for this state representative portion of tonight's forum, and we hope to see you all very soon. Good evening. All right, for those of you on the state representative side, thank you for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. You are free to stay on. If you do, we ask that you please just mute and turn down your video. And for those who are in the wings, Mr. Rice and Mr. Gray, you can unmute at this time and, well, turn your video on and unmute. And we'll get started here in just a few minutes. All righty, Laura, are you still with us?
I am.
Okay, are we set to go?
I'm all set if everybody's ready.
All right. Senator Gray, good evening. Are you ready, sir?
I'm ready.
Perfect. We hear you loud and clear. And Mr. Rice, are you ready, sir?
I am. Thank you, TJ, and good evening.
Yes, good evening. All right, so I do not have any coins, but I have two cards here. So I have in one hand, can't tell you which one, the Joker, and I have in the other hand the two of spades. So I will let Senator Gray decide which card he wants me to take. So actually, I'm on a mirror image here with the, this is actually my right hand. The left is my right. So go ahead and pick. Which one would you like?
The right hand will be fine.
The right hand will be fine. The right hand is indeed the Joker. So you can go first for your opening remarks and last for your closing remarks, or vice versa. Second for your opening remarks and first for your closing remarks.
I'll go last with the closing remarks.
All right, you got it. So that means, Chris, you will go first for the opening remarks. Sound good?
Well, I believe if we're switching, he would go first, so that way he can go last. I'll go last for my opening remarks. So I can go.
There you go. You are correct, sir. Sorry about that. All right. Are we ready, Laura, to put the Facebook Live back up?
I believe it's still on. Is that correct, Kaylin?
Yes, it is. We're live.
Oh, perfect. All right, then. Let's get going. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And on behalf of the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce and Rochester Listens, we'd like to welcome you to this New Hampshire State Senate Candidates Forum featuring incumbent Senator James Gray and Democrat challenger Christopher Rice. My name is TJ Jean from Frisbee Memorial Hospital, and I will be your moderator this evening. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you as we hear from the candidates on their views as we head into the November 3rd general election. Joining us today, we have two representatives from our local media. We have Mr. Glenn Cebalewski of Foster's Daily Democrat and Seacoast Media, as well as Harrison Thorpe from the Rochester Voice. We'd like to thank both of our media representatives for joining us this evening, as well as the chamber staff, Laura Ray and Kaylin Bamford, for all of their help and support in allowing us to do this virtually this year. Just a few ground rules. We did a flip of the card here, determining who will give their opening remarks. We'll have a 2-minute opening remark from both candidates, followed by our media questions, and then questions from the public if time allows, and then we'll go to a closing statement. So our opening statement will start with Senator James Gray.
Thank you, TJ. First of all, I'd like to thank the Chamber and Rochester Listens and you, TJ, for putting on this forum. I know that the other communities haven't contacted us, and that's partly because I think they're struggling with the logistics to pull this off. I am running for state senate re-election. I am a Vietnam veteran. I enlisted in the Army shortly after graduating from St. Thomas Aquinas High School in Dover. After returning from the Army, I was working down at Simplex Wire and Cable Company in Newington. During that period, I attended UNH during the day and worked afternoons and nights, earning my electrical engineering degree. Worked at the Naval Shipyard in Portsmouth for almost 30 years. Before going down to Washington, I was part of the management team that worked to save the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard from closure. In the legislature, I spent 4 years in the House of Representatives on the Election Law Committee, and for 2 years also on Children and Family Law. And then I've served 4 years now in the Senate, both in election law, Health and Human Services, and Municipal Affairs, along with a lot of the other assignments that you get as a state senator for special committees. I also serve as a Rochester City Councilor. Have since somewhere around 92 or 93, excuse me, 2002, 2003. Let me figure that out again. It may be a little less than that. But anyway, when I retired from the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, or actually went down to Washington, worked for 2 years. I came back in 2010.
Thank you, Senator. That's time.
Oh, okay.
Oh, thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Rice.
Thank you, TJ. Hello and good evening. Thank you to the Chamber of Commerce and Rochester Listens for hosting this event. My name is Christopher Rice, and I've served in the United States Army and currently work for the Rockingham County Sheriff's Office as a dispatcher. I currently serve as a Rochester City Councilor, and I'm running for New Hampshire State Senate to vote for things that my opponent has not. Mr. Gray has voted for an amendment to defund $55,000 for mental health and opioid addiction services. He voted to reduce public school funding, which would have provided over $100 million to our public schools and an additional $40 million to our municipalities. Mr. Gray has been sent to Concord as our representative, and what has he done for us? When Rochester was building the Richard Credo Tech Center, he voted against funding that would have been used for workforce development training. I believe that we need to invest in our education, workforce development, so that our future can grow, our job market can prosper, and we can provide quality and well-paying jobs. We need someone in Concord that will fight for the 500,000 people living with pre-existing conditions and over 100,000 people that are currently on Medicaid, with 55,000 on expansion. We need someone in Concord that will have a fresh, forward-thinking mindset and approach, who will work to get important legislation passed. Again, thank you to the Chamber, the media, Rochester Listens, for putting on this event today. I hope through this interview, I will earn your vote. And remember, we have 15 days till this election. And I urge everyone to please visit 603rice.com today to get more informed about my campaign.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rice. All right, now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our media panelists. We have Mr. Glenn Cebulski of Foster's Daily Democrat and Seacoast Media, as well as Mr. Harrison Thorpe of the Rochester Voice, who will be asking questions. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to the questions. I will chime in as soon as the minute expires. Even if you're mid-sentence or mid-thought, I'll let you know that time has expired. And then I please ask that you wrap up your thought and then let the other candidate answer the question, or we'll move on to the next question. So we'll start with you, Glenn, with your first question, and that will go to Senator Gray. My apologies.
Okay, thank you, TJ. I want to ask about the state's response to the coronavirus pandemic, specifically when it comes to schools. How would you rate how the state has handled it so far? And if you would like to see changes going forward, what would they be?
Thank you very much. The state's response to the coronavirus, the governor, as I said in the questions that you presented from Foster's that were printed, did a wonderful job. He went out and got some committees, put them together. They were bipartisan committees, and then they took on the issues and listened to the science, including the state epidemiologist. In the schools right now, the thing that we need to do with the schools is have a stable platform where the parents can count on the students being in school. One of the things that the governor has just announced is $200 per student. And to Rochester, that'll mean about $800,000. At some point, I would like to address some of the things that my opponent apparently thinks that I've done wrong, and would ask him to cite a bill because his revisionist history just doesn't seem to jive with reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rice.
To follow up on Mr. Cebulski's comment, and I thank him for showing up today, I believe that our federal delegation, which is led by Senator Shaheen, has done a wonderful job securing funding for COVID-19 relief. That's not only in education, but also for the municipalities. They have secured funding for our schools, hospitals, and I also believe that our state legislator acted on services that we need to provide to our communities in a timely fashion. They allowed telehealth, mental health services, and a host of others to continue. The governor allocated plenty of money, I believe, as intended, and he was advised by the legislature to do so. In my opinion, we are not adequately funded in terms of our school or the unemployment, and I would work to fix those deficiencies.
Thank you very much. Alrighty, our next question will come from Mr. Harrison Thorpe of the Rochester Voice, and it'll be directed to Mr. Rice with a follow-up to Senator Gray. Harrison, are you there? It looks like we might have lost Harrison Thorpe on the line. So Glenn, I'm going to punt it right back to you, sir, if you want to go ahead and ask your second question to Mr. Rice.
Sure.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there. Yes, I can, Harrison.
Go
ahead. The floor is yours.
I got a late whistle to unmute.
No problem.
So,
go ahead, sir. We can hear you.
Okay, so homelessness is considered by many a major problem in the Seacoast. In fact, some say if we don't invest hundreds of thousands of dollars, one proposal floated last year was a $500,000 low barrier shelter paid for by the federal government. Now, many people, they say if we didn't do that, then many people would die. Keeping in mind that federal tax dollars and taxpayer dollars that Rochester, keeping in mind that federal tax dollars are dollars that taxpayers from Rochester also pay. Do you believe the building of shelters is the answer, or is there a better, less costly solution?
Well, thank you, Mr. Thorpe, for your question. And I believe that it's a two-pronged approach. We're going to need not only low barrier shelters that will allow people to come in, get warm off the streets, get a shower, get a hot meal, but it's also providing the services of opioid addiction, mental health treatment, medical services, and those incorporated into a low barrier shelter would help people get back on their feet. I was and I am very proud to have sat on the Rochester City Council, and I worked very hard on opening up the warming shelter that we had located on Hanson Street this past year. And during the public safety meetings, when I work and serve on those committees, I kept regularly asking questions and stopping in to check on the shelter to make sure that it was operating efficiently. I think that we could use a shelter in the greater Rochester area in Stratford County, and I would work diligently to make sure that the federal dollars are spent wisely and that we have something for a long-term investment. We can't spend $500,000 on something that we're only going to have for 6 months or a year, and then we have to move. We have to constantly be thinking about our future.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Senator Gray, sir. Oh, you're muted, Senator. There you go.
Both Councilor Rice and I have received an email from a constituent here in the last few days, last Thursday or Friday, I believe. I took the action to get them in touch with the welfare office, contact the police to make sure that we were using the outreach that we've always been trying to. It's nice to talk about these things, but unless when presented with one of these problems, we actually take action, that it doesn't happen for the people. Yes, we need to provide those services. We're required to provide homeless people with shelter. But many of those homeless people will not accept it, or will not accept the conditions, like they can't bring in certain items, or they can't use drugs while they're there. They can't do other things. So again, when presented with one of these things, I go out, I take the action, I get them in touch with the service people that will help them, and that's the way these things need to happen.
Thank you. All right. Next question will be from Glenn Cebulski, and it will be addressed to Senator Gray with a follow-up by Mr. Rice.
Great. I'd like to ask about the record number of vetoes that Governor Sununu had, 79 vetoes. There were bipartisan support for a number of those bills, but is there one you'd like to see come back, Senator Gray, one that you would like to see passed?
Not really. You've got to remember that in the legislature, some of those bills were introduced by certain individuals so that they would be vetoed, so that they would be election issues. Again, many of the people of the state representative talked about 85% of the bills that are out there are passed bipartisanly. Well, part of the reason the number is so high of 77 is because bills that were vetoed in the first year, the Democrats are resubmitting them again to up the veto account in the second year. Again, they were not working in a bipartisan manner to make revisions to those bills. Some of them were on election law, and I tried to get the chairman to modify the positions, but they just wouldn't. They wanted to stick with the bill. In effect, in my opinion, they wanted it vetoed again.
Thank you. Mr. Rice.
Thank you, TJ, and thank you, Glenn, for the question. As you guys just heard, my opponent just said 77. The actual number was 79 bills that the governor vetoed, and I believe Mr. Cebulski made that point known. As far as a bill that I would like to see come back and be passed in a bipartisan fashion would be the minimum wage requirement. Right now, we are bordered by 3 different states, Maine, Vermont, and Connecticut, that all have a minimum wage standard that's well above $7.25. I was talking with a constituent the other day. He works at a local gas station, and he makes $7.90 an hour plus an additional 25 cents for working the overnight. He has to work a second job doing landscaping during the day just to put food on his table. We need to work as legislators in a bipartisan fashion to get bills to the governor's desk so that way he can sign them. As you can see, Senator Gray does not want to play. He does not want to work. He said not really as his opening sentence.
Thank you. Our next question will be addressed to Mr. Rice, and it will come from Harrison Thorpe.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So, Senator Gray, can you give us your views on charter schools, and why do you think the public school teachers unions are so against them?
Go ahead, Mr. Rice, and Senator Gray will have the follow-up.
Thank you. To talk about education funding and specifically charter schools, I would be for limiting the amount of charter schools that come in to the system. When we open up our charter schools to New Hampshire, we're talking about profiteering, and we're talking about creating them in a private manner where individuals can come in, run the education facility, and profit off of federal dollars and state dollars to make those centers and facilities work. I would like to see more education funding be provided to our Career Technical Education Center, specifically Richard Credo Tech Center, and others around the state, just to name a few. I would like to see that be expanded onto our workforce education. I believe that if we teach the students about computer sciences, healthcare options, and manufacturing, the amount of jobs that it opens up for people in this area is greatly increased. And that's what I would work hard in promoting up in Concord.
Thank you. Senator Gray.
One of the reasons for this question, I'm sure, is that the Democrats on the Finance Committee, I should say the Fiscal Committee, have decided to vote against accepting federal government funds in the amount of $46 million for local charter schools.
You have an electrical adapter for your little one?
Oh, Mr. Thorpe, if you could mute your phone, please.
And, you know, they are not a friend of public education. Their argument is that once started, they're going to have to be maintained by the taxpayers. Well, the taxpayers here in the city of Rochester have been able to reduce the number of teachers, the number of students in classrooms, especially at the middle school and the high school level, just because our population in the schools has been declining over several years. So again, I'm for public charter schools administered by local people, and I would have accepted the money from the federal government to accomplish that.
Thank you. Our next question now will be from Glenn, and it will be addressed to Senator Gray.
Senator Gray, what are the top issues you're hearing about when you talk to voters in the Rochester area? What are their biggest concerns?
The two biggest concerns, most of the voters who have contacted me have been worried about unemployment compensation, getting over problems that have risen because of that. There are numerous constituents who have called. We've been able to resolve all but one of those issues. The other issue that's out there is a stable school system. That the people are worried, and were worried at the end of the summer, that the students would be in school, out of school, in school, out of school. That puts a strain both on the employee and the employer for knowing who's going to be there. And I'm glad to say that in Rochester, we've only had 2 instances where we've had to go to something because of a COVID diagnosis, but their biggest concern has been the stability of the school and how that affects their employment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rice.
Thank you. I think the two biggest issues that I would say I hear from people a lot are COVID-19, testing, what's going to happen to our small businesses here in town, how are we going to protect them? And I will say that, to touch on small businesses briefly, we've had a great opportunity here in Rochester to keep our small restaurants, our local shops open throughout the summer, and we really need to work on maintaining that throughout the winter months as well. The other big thing that I believe in is healthcare, and I hear that a lot out on the trail. Is, you know, being a veteran and working with first responders, we have a very high population of veterans in the area, and the amount of healthcare that's afforded to them in the system through the VA is very minimal. And I would work with our federal delegation to expand those services here in the greater Rochester area and throughout the district.
Thank you. Senator Gray.
I thought we just did this one.
He did just answer.
Oh, I am sorry about that. Mr. Thorpe, your next question, and that will go to Mr. Rice. Harrison, you're on mute if you can hear me. All right. Glenn, you got one teed up that we can shoot over to Mr. Rice?
Absolutely, sure. I think it would be good to get both candidates on the record about how they feel about paid family medical leave. We know how that's been batted around in the state legislature the last couple of years. We know Governor Sununu's position. I'd like to hear from each of these candidates how they would approach it going forward.
Yeah, so thank you, Glenn, for the question. It's simple. We need to come together about paid family medical leave. It's not a tax like some people believe it is. Instead, it's more of an insurance program where our citizens can rely and draw from it. If you need to take care of a sick child, family member, or loved one, it's there for you. During times of COVID-19, many people were forced to leave their employment to tend to a family member or child. They did this with the risk that they could lose their job or even lose their paycheck. Paid family medical leave works similarly like our state's unemployment system, and we need to expand on that and protect Granite Staters through these tough times.
Thank you. Senator Gray.
Thank you. First of all, there were two bills introduced on paid family leave. One supported by the governor and one supported by the governor's opponent. The major difference between the two is one was mandatory and required if the employer did not provide it on his own, that it was going to require that a 0.5% of the wages be deposited into an account for the state of New Hampshire. I don't know about you, but tax is defined as a charge imposed by an authority for public purposes. And that's exactly what this 0.5% was going to do. The governor's proposal was non-mandatory. He was going to cover all of the state employees, and those people who wanted to would be able to join. Now, remember that this bill would not have gone into effect until July the 1st, and that the bill also required that the person be making payments for 6 months before that they would be able to draw any benefits on this. So although Councilor Rice is telling you that it would have helped in this situation, it would have no effect until January this coming year.
Thank you. All right, Harrison, have you joined us again by chance? All right, Glenn, I'll turn it back over to you. And this one will be to Senator Gray with a follow-up by Mr. Rice.
Okay, being an effective legislator, you have to work across the aisle to get things done. Can you point to something or a bill that you've obviously been in the legislature a long time, but can you point to a bill you worked on recently in a bipartisan way? And I would ask Senator Rice to respond, how he would approach that, not being a state legislator yet.
Thank you for the question. Last year, about July, August, I was approached by the Rochester School District that there was changes in how the Medicaid formulas were going to be checked and who could authorize services, etc. I took that. I went and got Senator Kahn, who is a Democrat on the other side of the state. We worked together in a bipartisan manner to pass Senate Bill 684, which provided the city of Rochester hundreds of thousands of dollars. This also goes to point out that even though Councilor Rice may think that I don't do anything over there, I guess he needs to actually find out. Certainly, I'd be glad to inform him of all of the things that I do over there, including getting $12 million for the Proto Vocational School when the Democrats had it so confused that it was taken out of the capital budget. I was able to get $8 million put back in the first year and $4 million put back in the next budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rice.
Thank you. I guess I would work with my fellow senators and not put a D or an R next to their name. I would get to know them and I would work with them personally. I would do that to accomplish the goals that we as a legislative body will set. And I would work across the aisle to pass important legislation that would be beneficial for our citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Glenn, if you have another question, I'll let you go ahead and ask.
Are you there? Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, Harrison. Go ahead, sir. This question will go to Mr. Rice with a follow-up by Senator Gray.
Okay. I know you guys both care about the citizens of Rochester. Well, there's one citizen of Rochester by the name of Evan Liberty who graduated from Spalding around 2000 or 2001. He was wrongly imprisoned in the Nisr Square massacre of Iraq in 2015. And he has spent, actually it was in 2014 in the fall, and he spent 6 years in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. Now, he was prosecuted by a very overzealous, biased U.S. Justice Department in a trial in 2014. Yet he has had to be resentenced, and many more things have come out that show dozens of Brady violations during his prosecution. Will you vow tonight to guarantee that you will find out about the case of Evan Liberty and Raven 2-3, and after reading the material that there is about this overzealous prosecution, that you will support his release? And if you are aware of him, please tell us how you feel.
Thank you, Mr. Thorpe, for the question. I am aware of Raven 2-3 and Mr. Liberty and all the other men that were in that unit at that time. As to the finer details of the case, I don't know the specifics, and I could not comment if he should be or will be released. But what I will say is that the evidence has been mishandled from what I have read and heard, and I would vow to have our federal...
Just vow to learn about it.
I would vow to learn about it and to fight about it. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Senator Gray.
As the questioner knows, that any issue that he has brought up to me, that I have researched it before we talked the second time, this would be no different. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. All righty. Glenn, I'll turn it over to you for next question, which will be to Senator Gray with a follow-up by Mr. Rice.
So during the coronavirus pandemic, the opioid crisis has continued unabated. And I've talked to one police officer that says it's sort of forgotten, or at least overshadowed. Do you feel that's the case? And what could and should the state be doing more to address substance misuse?
One of the things that was in the questions that you sent out for publication in Foster's was the data that was on the website for the state. After reviewing that data, it appears that the incidences of death in the state was declining steadily from 2017 until we got into the months here during the coronavirus. And after answering the question in Foster's, I also contacted some of the social service organizations, and they agreed that they were not able to provide services that they normally would have at that time. I believe that the hub and spoke model was working. I believe that we're also experiencing a change from some of the harder drugs to meth and other drugs right now. So again, first thing is to get the social services organizations up and running, provide the assistance to these people who are addicted to opiates, and go from there.
Thank you. Mr. Rice.
Thank you. So the governor came out with his law enforcement accountability and training commission, and in that they have several bills that cover mental health and opioid addiction services. And I support all of that legislation that the commission has put out. I feel that our model of the hub and spoke, as my opponent has called it, is partially working, but I do feel that we need to provide more resources to our first responders, more resources to our hospital system and our healthcare system to achieve the goal of reducing the death rate here in Stratford County and in District 6.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. All righty. Our next question. Harrison, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
All right. you want to go ahead and ask your next question, please? It'll go to Mr. Rice with a follow-up of Senator Gray.
Yep. Chris, I'd like to get everyone's take on the New Hampshire Advantage, which is no sales or income tax. Under what circumstances could these two bastions of the New Hampshire Advantage be on the chopping block?
So I'll come out and say, and thank you for the question. I'll come out and say that we need to provide a balanced budget this year, and that includes no sales or income tax. I don't think that this year is the appropriate time to even be having that discussion, and we need to continue to work hard to close the loopholes that we have done in the last budget cycle that will in turn increase revenues from large out-of-state corporations.
Thank you. Senator Gray?
The New Hampshire Advantage has served the state well. This one, we finally found something that Councilor Rice and I agree with: no income tax, no sales tax, and decreasing, not increasing taxes on business. Since I have a little bit of time left, I would ask my opponent that he would pledge to follow the election laws, including the filing of financial reports that can be read upon the website, and also to placement of signs here in Rochester. I'm told that the compliance officer in Rochester is getting a lot of calls from various people about other signs, including my opponents.
All right, thank you, Senator Gray. All right, Glenn, next question to you.
TJ, I think if it would be appropriate to hear a response to what Senator Gray said from Mr. Rice.
If you would like to form it in a question to him, I'll go ahead and let you do that. We don't, the way the rules were generated for this forum, the questions come from the media, and the candidates cannot question each other. So if you want to go ahead and form that question, certainly by all means go for it.
Okay, well, I'd like to know from Mr. Rice how you would respond to the accusations from Mr. Gray about your reporting.
Absolutely. So my reporting has been made available to Mr. Gray, not only on the online system, but I provided him a hard copy of the exact page he was requesting within a timely request or a timely amount. As far as the signs go, the signs have been distributed throughout Rochester. I don't have specific hands-on knowledge to the locations he's speaking about. I would caution, or I would say that the compliance officer has not called me, not asked me to change any signs, not asked me to remove any signs, and my phone number is available if he does see a location that is not in compliance with the City of Rochester's ordinances. In addition to that, there are a number of signs that are of Mr. Gray's that are on public intersections that are not allowed to be there. And I have not stooped to a level to call him out on it because I feel that the sign ordinance needs to be repealed in the City of Rochester.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rice. Senator Gray, the question was re-articulated by Mr. Cebulski. Do you have anything to add to the question that was asked?
Councilor Rice said that he gave me a copy of one of the pages of his financial report. That's not the first time. He missed some of the financial filings that he was supposed to make. The copy that he did give me, I brought it home. I've got a very powerful magnifying glass that I needed to be able to read that. It is unreadable in the copy that is online. And I also, when I pointed out to Councilor Rice the placement of some of his signs, I told him that he had only to call me if a sign was improperly placed, and I would take care of it. I still have not seen all of the signs that I told him about at that time removed from where they were.
All right, thank you very much, Senator Gray. All right, we are getting to the end here. It's 8:28. We're going to be wrapping up here at 8:30, so we will move to the closing statements. And as per the card draw at the beginning of our forum. Senator Gray will have the final closing remarks, so we'll hear from Mr. Rice first. You have 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
Thank you, TJ. And thank you to the Chamber of Commerce, Rochester Listens, and our media panels here today. Glenn Cebalewski and Harrison Thorpe from the Fosters and the Rochester Voice for coming to this event and asking the tough questions of us candidates. I hope that I'll get your support in this election on November 3rd, and it's time that we elect someone with fresh, forward-thinking mindset and usher in a new generation of leadership. I pledge to go to Concord and fight for the citizens of District 6, and I ask everyone to please check out my website, 603rice.com, and to get in contact, and I hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rice. Mr. Gray, 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. Again, no new taxes, no income tax, no sales tax, protect your constitutional rights. I pledge to you that as to the best of my ability, I will follow all of those laws, including ordinances in the city of Rochester, which I may not personally agree with. I also would like to ask Councilor to actually take down a posting that is on his finance person's where he equates my service to a monkey. I know that that could be a derogatory term, and I don't think that it's appropriate. I think that the negative things that have gone on in the Rice campaign need to stop, and I would appreciate Councilor Rice taking care of those.
Thank you so much, Senator Gray, and thank you, Mr. Rice, for those remarks. And I'd like to take a moment now and really thank Glenn Cebalewski for his questions this evening, as well as Harrison Thorpe, Glenn from Foster's Daily Democrat and Seacoast Media, and Harrison Thorpe from the Rochester Voice for their great questioning this evening. I definitely want to thank Rochester Listens for helping to coordinate this with the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce. This has been a great forum and a great opportunity for voters in Rochester to hear how their candidates would represent them if elected on November 3rd. And I also want to thank the City of Rochester Government Channel and Celeste Playa, who is going to be working to have this rebroadcasted on our community access. And I'd like to thank all of those who attended this evening, both on the state representative side and on the state senate side, for sharing their insights into the issues here in Rochester and in New Hampshire. And most importantly, I want to thank Laura Ring and Kaylin Bamford, who are at the Chamber office right now, helping to coordinate this and keeping everything running on time and keeping things smooth. There's Laura right there. Thank you very much, Laura. We appreciate you and everything that you do. And
Thank you for the great job moderating, TJ, this evening. We really appreciate all that you've done too.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Laura. Appreciate it. Always a pleasure. And most importantly, I just want to encourage everybody to get out and vote on Tuesday, November 3rd. As of the taping, it's October 19th today. People can still request absentee ballots. If you have any questions whatsoever about voting here in the city of Rochester or within District 6, please contact your city clerk's office or town clerk's office. They can help you through the entire process. But most importantly, make sure you exercise your right to vote on Tuesday, November 3rd. I'm TJ Jean on behalf of the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce and Rochester Listens. Thank you and good night.